This is a Paragon board overview for Diablo 4. There is also a build guide at the latter section of it. I'm going to try to stick all of the information generally about the Barbarian Paragon board to the front, so you can just take the information and do whatever you want with it, rather than watch the whole build. If you want to skip all of that and just see the build, there's going to be a link to the build in the description. Thanks for watching. Number 1, all legendary nodes except for one I think are a noob trap. And this is from making several builds, tweaking them, adjusting them, crunching the numbers. The one exception I think is this one. This gives you enemies that are affected by your bleeding for 3 or more seconds take 15% increased damage from you. That's basically a vulnerability that you get on the monsters with just having any form of bleed damage. And the monsters you should be most maximizing your DPS on are the ones that are going to be living the longest. I think this is obviously worth the points. Is going to be super beneficial. It stacks with all of your other damage bonuses. This is going to be the only one worth getting. The boards tend to be situated so that you have to pick whether or not you want the legendary node or the glyph based on where they are on the board. Some of them are easier to get to than others, but none of them seem worth the points to me except for this one. Almost all of the rare node bonuses, all of their thresholds are going to be in dexterity or willpower. None are on intelligence, very few are in strength, and most of the ones that are in strength also have in either a dex threshold or a dex requirement or a willpower requirement. That matters because as you path through the board, that means you should be picking up as many willpower or dex nodes as possible and skipping as much of the strength nodes as possible. So if you wanted to path up this direction on the board, you could path this way and get that node instead of that one, or that node instead of that one, or that node instead of that one. And you want to maximize the number of nodes that are dex and willpower and skip as much strength as possible. Intelligence is fine, but like the bonus is so meager, I think it doesn't matter, and you just want to maximize how much willpower and dex you get out of your board. Glyph nodes tend to be mathematically the best choice for what you should prioritize on your boards. The one exception is what I talked about earlier with the hemorrhage board. This is actually the hemorrhage board. Here's the legendary node here. If you notice, that's all the way at one end of the board and the glyph node is at the other. You can get up this way to get to the legendary node. If you did that and you wanted to get the glyph as well, you're going very far to do so. Mathematically, it tends to be better to go for the glyph. Pick a good glyph that's going to give you good bonuses and take the rare nodes that are within the range and pick up maybe a rare node that's super close by. Like you see, this one is very close by. If you were to somehow end up with this, if you ended up with this point here, then you only have one travel node to get into the magic nodes and get to this rare glyph node. Generally speaking, they're farther away and they're not worthwhile. You mostly want to be pathing to the glyph, pick a glyph you really like, and get to the next board and get to the next glyph. Some glyphs don't measure up. The ones that I've marked in red here I think are just flat out bad. There's other that are situational, but these ones I think are just flat out bad. If you notice here, this one increases physical damage bonuses and physical damage reduction on all of the nodes in range. The problem is I haven't seen a single node that's actually buffed by the physical damage reduction nodes. I think this is from a earlier version of the game when they actually had damage reduction based on the damage type. I haven't seen any of that. I've only seen damage reduction based on conditions related to the monster or to you. So damage reduction if the monster is vulnerable, or you're healthy, or the monster is bleeding, or you're close to it, stuff like that. I think that this is a holdover from a previous version of the game, and mathematically this is just not worthwhile. This as well. This is for overpower. I saw something about overpower being something you could stack in a earlier version of the game. That is not the current version of the game, as far as I'm aware. There is no way, as far as I can tell, that you can increase the frequency with which you overpower. It is an extremely rare occurrence. Maybe not extremely rare, but rare enough that you don't want to spec into it. So I think that's not worthwhile as well. Another thing that I think is not worthwhile are the magic node bonuses. There is an exception. So the one exception is if you highly value damage reduction, you can get an extra 14% roughly damage reduction by using this glyph, but you give up a significant amount of damage. I don't think that's worth it, even as somebody who prioritizes damage reduction, because you can get damage reduction elsewhere and it's not as costly. For example, if you use this glyph to both buff your rare nodes, you end up getting more damage reduction and don't take nearly the hit in damage bonus you get from the glyph. Also, if you look at the bonus effect here on this glyph, it's much better. I'll talk about that later. Something else to note, all these glyphs here on the left are for strength, all these glyphs here in the middle are for willpower, and all these glyphs here on the right are for dexterity. And if you'll notice that of the ones that are just flat out not bad from the strength, they tend to have some sort of weapon restriction, which I think is kind of not good, and that's why I didn't include them in my build. I think that's not the way, at least for me, to build. I'd rather be able to pick the weapon that I think is the best while I'm leveling up, even once I've reached deep into the Paragon tree. And if I'm level 90 and get some amazing polearm or two-hand axe or two-hand sword, I want to be able to replace whatever I'm using and use it. I think that that's going to end up being better for me than whatever added bonus I get from these glyphs. If later on in the end game you're absolutely sure about the weapon type you're using, you can pick one of these. And it'll probably give you a little bit better benefit than some of the glyphs that I've chosen. But it'll be very minor. It'll be questionable about whether or not it's worthwhile. And some of the bonuses on these aren't that great. See, overpower damage is here. We talked about why overpower damage is probably not that great. Crit damage is here, unless you're crit, it's not that great. So even if you use axes, then maybe that one's still not worthwhile. This one's damage to healthy and injured. That's still only applying to a portion of your damage, and it's also when you have to use a polearm. These are way too restrictive to me, so I didn't use them. I picked the ones in green here, and I picked this one here. It's the last one I'll talk about. This one makes monsters vulnerable for the first 3 seconds after you damage them, and then it won't do it again for 20 seconds, but it's per monster. So if you hit a pack and you hit all of them are instantly vulnerable. They're vulnerable for 3 seconds, and then this specific glyph will not make them vulnerable for another 17 seconds. But that 3 seconds can be extended by things like rend, and my build is rend, so this is very valuable to me. If you are not using rend, if you are not planning on, you don't have some means by which to extend this vulnerable, then maybe the 3 seconds here is not significant enough for you to use this glyph. In that case, you might want to just pick a weapon, because there isn't great options after that. As you see, the ones this is only going to be affecting core damage. This one here has super great bonuses, but it's only going to be effective when you switch weapons. That means if you're basically hitting a skill 3 times in a row, this is probably not good for you. And I don't know about you, my playstyle, I am not going to be switching skills every other time. And even then, you're locking into having to use more of your arsenal all the time. You would need two good two-handers all the time. You would need two good one-handers and a good two-hander all the time. So when I'd rather just have one two-hander or two good two-handers and use the other weapons entirely as stat bonuses. Use them for better aspects or whatever. I think that that would be better for your build. You are only going to be getting the bonus to a rare node. If you see this rare node here, it requires 160 willpower. This is your starting board. You are probably only going to be getting the bonus on the first two boards you add after this. You might get them on the third, depending on your build. My build does prioritize willpower and dex. I'm using willpower and dex glyphs to maximize how much willpower and dex I get, so I make it more likely that that third board I actually get the bonuses. I think mathematically that works out, but you're certainly not getting them beyond that. So maybe your first three boards you get the bonuses to the rare nodes, but beyond that you won't. So you need, and you're going to get them in order. It's going to be important which one you choose first, because your first board you're going to get those bonuses right away or fairly quickly. The second board will take a little longer, and the third board maybe take you till very, very late game. Adding to rare nodes that aren't very close to the path to or from a glyph is usually not worth it. And when I say usually, I probably mean never. They have to be very, very close to a path in order to be worthwhile. Rare node chunks, a rare node and its surrounding magic nodes tend to have one specific type of bonus. They will be defensive or offensive, they will be resists, or they will be damage, but you don't get anything else. Going very far for them tends to mathematically not be worthwhile. And by very far, I mean anything more than maybe 5 points. If you're spending six maybe, if you're looking at eight plus, that's definitely no. Mathematically you're doing something wrong. You've probably overlooked something. Since going very far for rare nodes is not worthwhile mathematically, that means you're mostly getting into the board, you're pathing to the glyph, and you're getting out and pathing to the next board. And then you're getting the rare nodes that are nearby, but you're not going far out of your way. See, if you look at this path here, this path goes up through a rare node cluster, makes it worthwhile. Then not very many points, you're into the glyph area. So this is whatever, 5-ish. This is 3. The bonuses you get from this and this are split between the travel nodes. You want to have as few sort of like blanket travel nodes as possible. And like we said earlier, you want them to be willpower and dex as much as possible. I'm switching to this other website because I think it's better for saving my build. I like the way that it displays certain information better, although it's not quite as pretty. That's why I started with the other one. The initial Paragon board that you start with, I spent 34 points getting through that. That might be valuable to you when you're doing your math about how far you think you can get. I spent 34 points getting through this board. You get 200 points from leveling to 100, and you get 20 points from renown. The stats shown in my build over here on the top left do not include the bonuses you get from clicking the Altars of Lilith. You should get roughly 50 points in each stat, but if you get all of your altars, I'm assuming if you get high enough that you're actually using this build guide, then you will have all of your Altars of Lilith. So you could probably assume that if you're close to a bonus threshold on a node, that if you're like within 40, 50 points, you're going to get to it. If you're 70, you're pretty close. That's it for general tips about the Paragon board. I'm going to go into the build guide now for my specific build. That is based on the skill tree I have down here at the bottom. TLDR is Lunging Strike, Rend, Death Blow, and Berserking key passive. If you're not interested in that build, then you can skip the rest of this video. If you want to just see this tree and the build, then you can click the link in the description. I'm going to go through basically what I chose and why, and each of the Paragon boards and what their strengths are. Hopefully my information about how I made these choices and why they ended up being better will help you design your own Paragon board. So to start, this is for a level 100 barbarian with 1 renown point. That's really not going to be how this works. You are going to get to probably like level 95, 96 and be finished with the points that I have spent here. And because you will probably get all of your renown points before you get that far. So this is pretty much a guide for up to about level 95, 96. That leaves you with a decent little chunk of points to hopefully get another few little things that are valuable, and I will talk about those at the end. Before I go through the board choices and glyph choices one by one, I'll show you this. This is a breakdown of a number of builds that I tried and the stats that I got as a result. I made 5 glyph boards and 5 glyph builds and 4 glyph builds. I did a couple variations. This is what I end up going with. This is what I think is the best. If you'll notice here, if you go with less glyphs, the 4 glyph version 2 here has a little bit more damage. But if you look at here, I don't include vulnerable damage in this number here. So the build that I've chosen it tops out at 643% damage bonus, roughly. These are things that I think you're going to just have pretty much all the time. Physical damage, berserk damage, damage when you're berserking, damage when you're healthy, damage when the enemy's bleeding, when you're close, and they're elites. Those are all damage bonuses I think I'm pretty much going to have all the time, so I included that in the main number. This is vulnerable damage. That's a little more questionable. I don't know if I will always be vulnerable, or I don't know if the mob will always be vulnerable. Certainly the first hit it will not be, so I didn't include it in the main number. If you look over here at the highest damage I was able to achieve with less glyphs, I only used 4 glyphs in this build, that gets up to 708, but that has no vulnerable damage at all. If you include the vulnerable damage here, it pretty much gets to the same. The big difference here between 5 glyphs and 4 glyphs is that with this build, you're getting the glyph that makes the mob vulnerable for the first 3 seconds that you fight it, which I think is super valuable. So even if these damage numbers even if this damage number of the 4 glyph build is a little bit higher, I think the bonus from the bonus damage you're going to get from those mobs being every single mob you fight being vulnerable for the first 3 seconds is going to be super worthwhile. Also, this has 10 to res all, this has none. The rest of the build is pretty much the same. This has the 4 glyph build had some little minor bonuses that I don't think matter. Increased berserker duration by 27% versus 6. I mean, it might give you an extra second, but you really should be keeping your berserk up, at least with my build, all the time. I don't think that extra second matters. Movement after you kill an elite is nice. I would certainly like it, and that's actually the node section that I get to at the very, 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 very end of the game. If I get that far, if you're like level 97 or something, you're probably buying that node cluster, but I don't have it in this build right now because of the extra glyph. Something to note here at the bottom: when you make a 4 glyph build versus a 5 glyph build, you end up with getting less of dexterity and willpower, which are the things you need to trigger your rare bonuses on your nodes. So the 5 glyph build has better dexterity. Primarily that's the issue. So with adding only 65 dex, I'd get an extra 10% damage on the 5 glyph build. That same bonus would take me 114 points of dex on the 4 glyph build. Even if you account for the about like 50 stat points you get from the Altars of Lilith, that makes it much more feasible on the 5 glyph build than the 4 glyph build to actually get that bonus. As you can see from the numbers here of the damage breakdowns, I'm going to be having Berserk up all the time. The mobs are going to be bleeding, and I think it's fairly reasonable to assume that you're going to be healthy. If you're not, that's probably not a problem that can be fixed by the build. So the skills you use are going to be crucial in determining which nodes have value and which don't. Are the mobs bleeding? Are they not? Are you critting? Are you not? Are you using one-handed weapons, two-handed weapons? There's all sorts of nodes that have very restrictive values. Are you berserking or you're not? You need to know this before you build your Paragon tree, and your Paragon tree needs to reflect the playstyle of your character, what skills you're using. I'm assuming in my build that I will not be stacking crit. It doesn't seem to be worthwhile to me yet. That might change, but right now I'm not building for crit. I want to be weapon agnostic. I want to be able to pick the best weapon available as I level up. I don't want to be locked into a polearm or a sword or an axe. I want to be able to use whatever drops. It's going to have to be slashing because I'm going to use rend. Another key assumption of this build is that damage reduction matters. I think that playing the Barbarian, you're going to find that unless you can stand there and do your burst damage without having to like spam your potions, you're going to have a rough time. And as the game gets harder, as you get higher, as you do capstone dungeons and whatever, you're really going to need to be able to get in there and do your damage. So I think your damage reduction value needs to be super high. Another thing about that, and something sort of like entice you to focus on damage reduction and maximizing it early in your Paragon build, is that if you get enough damage reduction, you can stop using Challenging Shout. If you stop using Challenging Shout, you get an extra skill slot. That skill slot is going to be extremely valuable. You're either getting an ultimate skill, or you're getting something that's giving you resource generation, or you're something that's giving a more damage modifier. There's great options for you to stick something in that Challenging Shout slot if you can somehow get rid of the need for that damage reduction on it. So I think end game, that's the goal. Get your damage reduction up high enough that you can drop Challenging Shout and take something else that's going to increase your damage, your mobility, whatever. The first thing I'll say about the starter board is that you're probably going to end up sticking a strength glyph in the glyph socket. There's 70 strength and 39 dex and 39 willpower in the glyph area. That mathematically compared to the other boards ends up making it not quite as good as the other boards for dex and willpower, so your kind of strength is the best bang for the buck. I'm choosing Ire, which gives you berserking damage. If you're not getting berserking for some reason, then you end up getting locked into a weapon slot or a weapon type if you want to pick one of the other strength glyphs. I went over that earlier. So I hope you're choosing the berserking key passive and keeping berserk going. I think that's mathematically going to be the better build. Regardless of what else skills you're using or what you're doing, I think that having berserk up is going to be the way to go. The Ire glyph also gives you 10% damage reduction from elites, which are probably going to be the most damaging monsters you face while you're berserking as well, so it's defensive and offensive. You'll notice that I skipped the rare node here on the bottom left. It doesn't take many points to get to it, but I don't know how valuable percent life is yet. And I have a feeling, given what you get from just socketing rubies in gear, that we're not maybe going to care that much about 10% HP. There are points at the end of the build, so if that ends up being a wrong assumption, it's fairly easy. It's just 4 points to get in there and get 10% life. So if that ends up being a wrong assumption, we can always change our minds whenever we want along the way through the build. The first board we're choosing past the starting board is going to be Carnage. Something important to note about when you choose your first board is that you're going to be getting the bonuses from the rare nodes, because the thresholds to get them is as low as it's going to get. It's only 260 willpower to get to this. You're certainly going to get to that. 270 willpower for this one, 270 dex. You're definitely going to be getting these bonuses, so you want to pick a board that has good rare nodes that you're going to care about getting the bonuses on them. You don't want them to be, I think you don't want them to be at this point things like armor or resists or whatever. I think that you're going to want damage, you're going to want damage reduction, you're going to want to be getting bonuses like that out of your first board. Another thing that's important on your first board is you want the travel path to the glyph and then to the next board and probably to another one to be fairly efficient. So if you look here at this board, these are damage nodes here on the bottom right. So you're spending 5 points to get to damage nodes, then you're spending 3 points to get into the glyph area. Then you're maxing out your glyph. Then I'm pathing over here to get up to the next board is not too terrible. There's another rare section there, rare node there, and then there's 5 more points to get to the next board. So by doing this, you're minimizing your travel nodes compared to the nodes that actually have value to you. And like I said before, you want to be maximizing how much willpower and dex you get along the way. You're going to go through a lot of boards, and not many of them have multiple rare nodes that give damage like this and also mitigate how many nodes you have to travel through to get to the next board. I think this is the best starting board. My initial build did not have Carnage. It had something else. I had Carnage being selected second, and I switched to this, and this ended up having greater stats. So that's the version 1 and version 2 of the stat breakdown you saw earlier. If you want to look at the differences there, you can see it's like 50% damage difference. Pretty substantial. The glyph we're putting in the Carnage board is Exploit. That's the one that makes enemies vulnerable for the first 3 seconds. I think that's going to be super valuable. I'm using Rend. I think I can extend that on anything that's going to live for any duration of time. I think that makes the damage you lose because of the meager damage bonus it gives you worthwhile. A strength glyph here would give you a little bit more damage, but it wouldn't make monsters vulnerable. It's a trade-off. I think your choice here is between 50% damage roughly and making the monsters vulnerable for the first 3 seconds all the time. 50% damage is a lot. It's a good bonus, but I think that triggering that vulnerable every time is going to be better than that. If it's not, you can always switch it out. If you are going to switch it out, it's probably going to be a strength glyph, or you can use the higher damage dex glyph called territorial. The reason I didn't use territorial here is this glyph area only gives 44 dexterity, and the glyph area of another board that I actually put to territorial in has 49. So I'm getting an extra 9% damage by putting it in that one over this one. The exit paths in this board are very efficient. Incorporate another damage node cluster and lead us to the second board we choose, which is Blood Rage. On the Blood Rage board, we choose the glyph Revenge for the rare node bonus. We're doing that because this is, like I said in the beginning, this is pretty much the last time you can guarantee you're going to be getting these bonuses. You'll probably get them for the next board, but it won't be until very, very late game. You should get these rare node bonuses without too much trouble. And the most important thing to know about the rare node bonus glyph is that it mostly allows you to prioritize damage reduction. There's a lot of other glyphs that just give you flat damage, but there are none of the glyphs except for the ones that give specific percentage damages to nodes in general buff damage reduction. So the magic ones, which I said earlier, and mathematically just don't work out. Only the magic node bonus glyphs also allow you to stack damage reduction, and they cost you way more damage than the rare one does. So we're choosing the rare one here. It gives 192% bonus to all rare nodes within range. Something else to note, which is super important, is the bonus on this glyph, the Thorns bonus, should be extremely beneficial. It should be very, very easy to get some form of Thorns on your character, even if you have to use a potion. You can spend 1 point on the skill tree, you can use a potion, you can have 1 gear affix to get any amount of Thorns at all. Then that should make it so that taking damage from a monster, any sort of fight that lasts any duration of time, which are generally going to be harder fights, you're going to be stacking a vulnerability on the monster that's going to stack with all of your other damage. So this glyph here buffs the damage reduction node here and the damage to bleeding enemies here. And with this buffed damage reduction node and the 3 that are attached to it, you end up with 29% damage reduction to bleeding enemies, which is a substantial amount. Much more than you're going to get on any other part of your Paragon board. In order to get that much damage reduction, just the bonus amount that you're getting from the rare glyph, you would have to go path to another board and spend a lot of points. So this ends up being a very valuable, in my opinion, worthwhile thing to do. You get basically an extra 15%-ish damage reduction out of this glyph. This board, like the other one, is great because the exit path is very efficient. And also, if you notice there's this willpower thing staggering out here, that makes it more efficient to get to this set of damage and elite nodes here. The next board we're attaching down here, attached to the left of the first board you chose. Attached to the left of Carnage is Weapons Master. As you see, it's similar to the other one. There's very short path to get into the glyph area. Very, very short path to get out and get to the next board. Also, it's important to note this is certainly going to be the last board where you're going to get the rare node bonus. So this having flat physical damage is certainly beneficial. And this is the cluster, this right down here that we haven't selected. This is going to be the most efficient use of points if you want extra damage somewhere along the way, or if you get over level 95, 96, then this is probably where you're going to spec into. You're going to get a big chunk of damage here, and you only have three pathing nodes along the way. And if you're that far in the game that you're getting this, you might actually have enough damage, have enough to get the damage bonus here. And if you do, you're getting a lot of damage out of this section. I think the total damage you get out of this section, if you're able to get the bonus, is 56% damage, which is a great deal of damage for only an 8-point investment. We are choosing the Imbiber glyph here. We're doing so because this particular board has 49 willpower. That makes it one of the best willpower boards you're going to have. This also gets 8.82% per point, whereas the strength glyphs only give 7.2, so that extra percent is meaningful in terms of the value of the glyph itself. Also, you're going to want to stack willpower for like the reasons I said earlier. That's how you get your rare node bonuses. I think that if you wanted to, if you were certain about a weapon type, if I was certain about a weapon type, this is the node that I would replace with a strength glyph for a specific weapon, because losing the willpower bonus is going to be on defensive rare nodes. So maybe you lose out on some armor, but that's not super important. Certainly, like, it's much more important that you make your dex thresholds to get your damage. And also, if you see here, this is 430, you're pretty close. If you lose a little bit of strength, the altars of Lilith are going to be enough. So you're not going to be missing out on any of your actual damage reduction node bonuses. So if you want to put a second strength node, strength glyph in, this is probably the place to do it. I think 30% increased potion healing, which is the bonus you get from this glyph, is certainly worthwhile. Certainly later on, it's going to be much more important that we stay topped off, and a 30% bonus is very hefty. It's compared to the other nodes on the tree, getting potion healing bonus is not cheap, and they tend to be in small clusters, and they give you like 4%. So I think that 30% here is a actually worthwhile thing, even though you might be overlooking it. After this board, we are attaching the hemorrhage board that we talked about earlier with the legendary node that gives you the vulnerability from bleeding. I think that's going to be super important, and yeah, I would pick this board earlier, except for the rare node bonuses are now impossible, pretty much. I'm going to assume at least they're impossible. By the time you get to adding your fourth board here, this threshold is 750 strength. That is very substantial, obviously. You're not going to be getting those rare bonuses. If this rare bonus was better, then you could add this earlier. I don't think that damage over time is worth it for me. I would rather have the flat physical here and the potential of the much more substantial 16% damage to elites here. That's why that board is third and this is fourth. So you just simply path to the hemorrhage legendary node. You pick up the rares right next to it and the flat physical damage. And if you notice here, I don't take the physical damage over time nodes because I don't think they're worthwhile. At least the ones that I can skip. Now you move on to the last board, which I attach here on the top right, and that is the Warbringer board. We're choosing this board because, like the others, very short path to get into the glyph area. The glyph I'm choosing for this board is Territorial. The reason that I have held this is one of the best damage glyphs you're going to get. It gives 9.6% per 5 dexterity. That ends up being, at least this glyph area ends up being 111% damage, which is generally higher than you're going to get even out of strength glyphs. This is the highest like pure damage glyph that I've got. It also includes damage reduction. The reason I'm saving this till later is because I think that this board is really only good for this glyph area. I don't really care, I think, about Max Fury. I don't think I care about Max Fury on this side, and if you look, the path is pretty terrible. Do you want to path through Max Fury to get to other stuff? No. So I think this board is only good. It kind of dead ends here. And so there's no other rare, no bonus, there's no nothing. So you don't really want this board to be in your first 3, but it does have 49 dex, which makes it the best for this glyph. 111% damage. Also gives 8 resists all, and then with these others picked up, ends up being a pretty good general bonus. Actually, it's not 8, it's 4, because remember, you're not picking this board until late, so if you look at the bonus requirements there, that's 620 dex and 620 willpower. That's just way too much. You're probably not getting that. You're definitely not getting that. So you're getting the most out of the glyph, and you're moving on. That is the end of this other cluster in the Carnage board. I think also is extremely beneficial. This here ends up being HP regen. It's only 2.5%. I don't think the potion healing bonus is here. Remember how I talked about before the 30% being substantial? This is only giving you 2 per point. It's kind of weak. This is 4 on a rare node. But the healing over time I think is interesting. Maybe 2.5% HP per second ends up being enough to help you sustain, sort of like deal with little hits. If you have high enough damage reduction, that this is something you'd want to get, and it's fairly close. I think those are the only good options for points beyond this. After that, I would say the life in the starter board. You can spend 4 points and you can get 10% max life. And there's another 2% life here if you want that, but I think you're kind of running out of options there. The nodes you'd have to get to do something else. It's either resists, if you need something specific, go for it. I don't know that I'm going to care about control impaired duration reduction. You're probably just going to want to find some way to get unstoppable and not waste points on this. There are not other great options. You can poke around and see if you see anything you like. I'm going to talk briefly about the boards I skipped and why, just so that you understand the choices. Hopefully that helps you make your choices on your build. I skipped the Decimator board. If you look here, this is all vulnerable contingent stuff. It's vulnerable damage reduction from vulnerable enemies. The node pathing isn't great, you see. It's not terrible, but it's not super quick either. You're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points on 2 sides, and this one is 5 points. So you have one good entrance node, maybe, depending on where you end up using the points here in the glyph area. But generally speaking, I don't like this one because while I do plan on making the mobs vulnerable all the time, and it is the second glyph that I chose to make mobs vulnerable for 3 seconds, I don't know how much uptime you're going to have on it. It might be a 50-50 proposition, or maybe it's something that you have for a little while and then don't have for a long while, and then have again on the mobs you care about. And I wouldn't want my bonuses to be tied to something that is going to be that unreliable. So that's why I don't like that board. Next board is Flawless Technique. As you see here on this board, it's pretty much the same thing as the other in terms of the distance to get into the glyph area. It's not great, but it's not terrible. I'll talk about that in a second. This is crit damage and one-handed. So this is for a very, very specific build. You have to be using one-handed weapons and you have to be stacking crit. I'm not doing either of those things. I wouldn't want to even be locked into a weapon unless I had to be locked into a weapon. And I don't know about the viability of crit yet. So I don't think this board is good. I think that damage reduction from close enemies is good. It's fine. I like the bleeding because at least when they run away or I run away or whatever, my damage reduction isn't disappearing. At least this is working while you're there attacking them. I think bleeding is better. Close isn't terrible. Damage from close isn't terrible. But the restrictions on the other thing make it unusable for me. Maybe for your build, you're heavy into crit and one-handed. And if so, then you could incorporate this. But I don't think the pathing to the gates is extremely efficient. This is potion healing and armor. That's definitely going to be skippable. This is another crit strike thing. So if you're heavy into crit, yeah, this maybe is the board for you. But even then, you're still probably only coming in this gate, the bottom, and the gate on through the gate on the left, and you're getting the crit damage here, and then you're getting the glyph, and you're getting out. This is just not a great board. Again, you'd have to path extremely far around to get to this node. I just don't think it's worthwhile. If you came in from the other way, you still have to path very far to get to it. These are more one-handed things. Just don't like the board. If you're one-handed in crit, take a closer look at it. The last board I skipped is Bonebreaker. So notice here, you're only not using 3 boards. So you're using the vast majority. These aren't great choices. At some point, you're kind of you're picking the best you got and accepting maybe not perfection. Like, for example, on this board down here, the one that I'm picking, let's see, 1, 2, third, I would like if this node was actually damage reduction, not armor. I don't really value the 200 armor I'm going to get from this. You potentially get from this. I would rather have something else. The armor nodes here are just not super valuable. If I could have skipped them, then I would have. This is willpower, so I couldn't. So that's not perfect. You're not going to get perfect. You only get to skip 3 boards. This board here does have good pathing nodes. So if for some reason you don't like one of the other boards that I have, maybe the berserking is a problem for you, maybe bleeding is a problem for you, then this board is a good option. You see that there's very good paths here. It's 5 to each side, not just 5 to one side and then whatever this is, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you're saving some points there. The problem with this board is a big one. There's 2 actually. First of all, overpower damage I think sucks. I think, like I said earlier when I was talking about the glyphs, I think this is from an earlier version of the game. I don't think that overpower is really going to be worthwhile to you, so all these nodes kind of suck. This is terrible. And that's maybe what makes this board junk. I kind of don't think anybody should use this board. It's a good damage reduction number, but if you notice this is while you're healthy. You're essentially building in an auto-triggered vulnerability on yourself by stacking this node. Imagine if you stuck the rare node in here and you had 192% to this, 192, whatever it is, whatever that is. It ends up being something like 17% extra. You end up, is it more? Whatever. It ends up being a lot. These stack with it as well. So imagine you have 30 some odd percent, because I think that's what it ended up being. It would end up being something like 31, 32% damage reduction. But imagine you have 32% damage reduction, but it only applies when you're healthy. Well, that's great until you get hit. And then congratulations, you got hit by something that wasn't even super strong, and now you lost 30% damage reduction. That is a terrible thing to be spending points in. If you're buying this and you're showing the numbers and you're like, look at my damage reduction, it's great, you're going to be very disappointed. You're going to kill yourself. This is a serious trap. Do not get this board. Do not stack in to these nodes. Really quickly, I'll go over I made a 4 glyph version of this build. I got more rare nodes instead of the 5th glyph, because just in case, imagine maybe ranking up the glyphs is extremely annoying. Maybe getting them all is a problem. For some reason you don't want to have a 5th glyph, then this is a way to go. You're getting more out of your rares. If you'll notice here, the big difference on this board is down here. So in the weapons master board, instead of just pathing up and then pathing around and out to the next board to get another glyph, you're pathing down here to get the physical damage nodes here, and you're pathing or so over here to the left, and you also get some attack speed out of that, and you're pathing down here to get the damage to elites. You are also pathing up here to the left to get damage. But you look how far I'm traveling here. Let's see, what is this? This. If you end up taking this route, then this node is probably worth it. I think I'd spend 4 points to get random berserking chance off killing stuff. That's probably worthwhile, but only if I'm this close, and I have no intention of getting this close. Because look how many points I had to spend to get up to these damage nodes. That was my best option. There's other stuff that's kind of nearby your build. If you look at this is armor and cold res, meh. You could spec here into healing instead. I'd maybe do that, but then you lose a significant amount of damage. And if you look at the comparison here, at the 4-glyph version 2, your damage is roughly the same, but you're not triggering vulnerable. That's what I'm not getting. And I think that's a pretty substantial loss. You lose some armor, you lose some resists to all, and your chances at hitting the glyph bonus on your third board is much less likely, which is even more important in the 4-glyph build. So I just don't really like it. If you can get 5 glyphs, if they aren't a problem to rank up and acquire, then the 5-glyph build is going to be the way to go. Really quick here at the end, I'll go over my build just so you understand the skill choices that I'm making and how they relate to the Paragon choices that I'm making. So lunging strike plus the bleed, rend plus the vulnerable damage. I'm getting the health and the damage reduction there. I'm assuming I can't quite drop Challenging Shout yet. I would like to. I will, if I can. I would probably end up getting Rallying Cry for the extra Fury generation and the initial Fury generation when you press it, and also the movement speed and the Unstoppable. I would rather, I think, have that than the damage or extra damage from Warcry, because I have other means of generating berserking. That's just my initial conception, but I don't know if that's going to hold true. So 3 points into movement speed, you're going to get leap, and the extra fury, 40 fury, when you hit an enemy, that should help you with increasing your burst damage. You're going to get the damage reduction here while berserking, and 1 point here just to make this cause berserking. This tree is heavily structured based on this key passive. I will have a different looking tree when I'm leveling up until I get to this point and actually get the berserking key passive. I transition into this. I can make a longer video about what the other trees look like along the way. If you're interested in that, you can leave a comment in the replies. So death blow here, maxing it out, making that cause berserking as well. You're specking up in here with the extra damage. That's one of your best sources of damage on the skill tree. Yeah, the extra crit I think is worthwhile, and then the 1 point here to cause your core skills to make vulnerable. I think that 1 point and rend along with its enhancement here should make it so that when you rend whatever it is you're rending, that initial vulnerable should be 3 seconds. And generally speaking, when you're fighting something hard, you're not rending once. You're rending 2, 3, 4 times. If you can do that, then you're stacking up vulnerable for a good portion of time. Probably long enough that if you're running something that's increasing your resource generation, you're going to be able to drop a few lunging strikes in there and then rend some more and keep extending vulnerable. Maybe you can extend vulnerable long enough to actually get in your next death blow shot. The 1 point here is a must, just to make your bleeding effect slow, just to get the extra synergy with extra damage to slowed monsters or CC'd monsters. Gonna get Wrath of Berserker here, and its enhancements, I think that this is going to be a good source of sustained healing. The 1 point here, because I don't think I really care about max fury, and then the 3 point here to heal 9% of your maximum life for each 100 fury spent. I think that that heal is going to land after you're dumped 3 rens into the boss, and those 3 rens, I think, come at a time when you should have taken damage, and this 9% healing is going to be meaningful and substantial. And then obviously the Berserker thing at the bottom. Alright, so that's the Paragon tree, that's the build. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Thanks for watching.